Hi, everybody. It's Marlene with Eerie News once again. We are back to going over some old and strange and unusual events. Which, by the way, I am working on an updated. I'm going to be bringing you Eerie News, but something um something that more. I'm going to try to mix in real recent stuff. Let me see what I can get going. And but you'll see. I'm sure you'll notice it when I bring it on board. But anyway, let's get on to our next story. Our next story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled Ghost of South Florida. Over the years, several ghost stories were sent anonymously to Miami Ghost Chronicles. It's these quaint and subtle stories of hauntings that are so fascinating because you realize that ghosts make their presence known in the most mundane of settings. Surnames and exact addresses were excluded in order to protect the privacy of families. The following are those stories. First one is titled Uncle Charles. And this was, by the way, this is the emails of the people that submitted the stories. My family owns an old home in rural Davie. The tiny home was hand built by my great uncle via marriage, a person I have never met. His name was Charles C. And he and his wife Betty lived there. He was said to be a nice man, and you can easily see how much he loved his home. Betty C. was an Alzheimer's victim, and Charles cared for her himself. He was putting a new roof on the home one day when he fell ill and came inside to lie down. He suffered a heart attack in the tiny hallway and passed away. Betty, being in a poor state of mind, stepped over his body for 2 or 3 days before neighbors came to investigate. Having not seen Charlie, they broke down the front door and found him deceased. The spooky, if you can call them that, events came later. My father lived there for some time and claimed to have seen him a few times. He moved out, and sometime later, I was preparing to move in. My husband and I came one evening to begin moving a few items in while he was putting things in the outdoor sheds. I was bringing the items into the guest bedroom. I walked through that small hallway many times, and although I knew Charles had died in the house, I was not aware he had died in that hallway. As I continued to walk in and out, through the hall and past the darkened master bedroom into the smaller room, I felt watched. And this may sound weird, but in my head, I heard someone saying, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I didn't think I didn't hear anything aloud. The words just popped into my mind. I got a really creepy feeling and wouldn't go back in alone. During our time living there, it was mostly peaceful with a few minor exceptions. Occasionally, when wearing a dress, I felt someone tug at the back. Sometimes I'm told Charles did this to his wife often. Another time, we had a weird experience in the middle of the night. The lights in the shed had stopped working, and we couldn't figure out why. Weeks passed, and we ignored it, using a flashlight if need be. One night, I heard noises out in the yard and peeked out to see one shed light on, the door open, and noises coming from it. I woke my husband, who grabbed our only weapon, an old BB gun, and went out to check. No one was there, and we couldn't figure out how the light got on, nor could we figure out how to turn it off. We never knew which switch would correct it, and none responded. Eventually, the light just went off again. We don't get along with my uncle particularly well, and we moved after 2 years to Tamarack, Florida. My father and sister live there once again now and haven't reported anything too odd. The idea being that Charlie knows who they are. We'd never try to get his attention, but I feel strongly that any attempt to do so would be successful. There you go. By the way, these are all true ghost stories. This was submitted to me via Miami Ghost Chronicles many years ago. This is another one. This is titled Haunted Condo in Northwest Miami. There's a condominium I used to live in. The only words I can use to explain the place is infested. While living there, at least 5 people died, and about 1 year before I moved out, a man shot himself in the head and died on the first floor. Another lady was murdered in the elevator. The one prominent entity in that apartment building was a dark, shadowy figure of a man, which seemed to have a negative origin. Lucky me, I was the only one in the apartment that he never had an encounter with. I heard about it on a daily basis from my sisters, who constantly had to deal with it. It seemed that the smaller of the two bedrooms, which was where both my sisters slept, was where all the activity was. On one occasion, me and my mother woke up to the sound of my sister screaming as if someone was attacking her. Well, when we reached the room, she was screaming about something pulling on her leg, and we did see her struggling with it. My other sister, on the other hand, was sound asleep. As soon as we turned on the light, nothing was going on at all. They also reported seeing this figure walking behind them while they were fixing themselves up in the mirror, or seeing it sit on their beds. Although the figure didn't seem evil, it wasn't violent with any of us. It only basically pulled practical jokes and, of course, the occasional scare. On one occasion, a friend of my sister's saw it sitting on the couch in the living room, after which we had to take her home. She never stepped back foot in that apartment again. The halls of the building also had the quality of making you feel as if someone is watching or following you. It gave you that numb feeling in your eyes that you get when you're afraid. Of my many encounters, I only had a handful there. One encounter was with a huge man, completely white. I know he had features and was wearing some sort of clothing, and he didn't seem threatening in the least, but I still ran away because, of course, I didn't recognize him or what he was doing in my house. I was only 7 years old at the time, so I ran. I also had to change the location of where I slept because I felt such a negative feeling where I was sleeping. Also, I would stay in my sister's room every so often, which I heavily regret, as I would also experience lights flickering on and off and loud noises coming from the kitchen, as if someone was looking through the drawers. It never failed, the noise always happened, but it could only be heard from the smaller bedroom. Although we dealt with it for almost 6 years, we never inquired on the history of that apartment. Whoever came after us to live there probably didn't see the word ghost anywhere in the lease. Mhm. Yeah, and contrary to a shadow man, she saw a guy that was like all white, like transparent, maybe she meant. Next story is titled Apartment Near UCF Campus. And for those of you who are not familiar, that's UCF stands for University of Central Florida. This is something that happened a few years ago while visiting my friend Valerie while she was living on her own in Orlando. She was up there for school, and her parents bought her a one-bedroom apartment near the UCF campus. The buildings looked pretty new, but you could tell they were renovated, especially when you went into the elevator. Anyways, we were spending the weekend there with her, along with a bunch of our other friends, to go to Halloween Horror Night at Universal Studios. The night was a bit freaky to begin with. While I was taking a shower and getting ready to go, the towel that I used and had hung on the rack behind me started to move like if there was a strong wind blowing at it. Mind you, there is no window in the bathroom, and no air from an air conditioning could have moved a wet towel that way. I didn't think much of it and just went on getting ready. I was almost done and went to grab my lipstick from the counter where I had set it down just moments before, and it was gone. I checked everywhere, on the floor, all over the counter, and in my purse. I know I wasn't going crazy, so I called in my husband to check the bathroom for me as well. Maybe I was missing something, but he could not find it either. I said forget it and just went out into the living room. Valerie was to take a shower next. She walked into the bathroom and found my towel on the floor. She scolded me for not picking it up and throwing it behind the toilet. I told her that I had left it hanging on the door, which is on the opposite end of the bathroom, nowhere near the toilet. We both looked at each other, and I saw a look of discontent in her eyes, and I knew she knew something more than she was letting on. I left her in the bathroom, and she asked us not to come into the room since she was scared and wanted to leave the door to the bathroom open. Only a few minutes passed when she came screaming out of the tub and into her room, naked and grabbing a towel off her bed. We ran to see what was going on, and she had three scratch marks, or something, or rather, someone or something had clawed her on the back. The cuts were somewhat deep, and she was bleeding very badly. Another friend that was there helped her clean up, while my husband and I looked inside the tub, wondering if maybe it could have been something that had brushed up against her that could have scratched her like that. When I opened the shower curtain to look into the tub, I almost fainted when I saw my lipstick sitting on the lower rim of the tub. I didn't even want to pick it up. We walked back into the room, and Valerie confessed that there had been some weird things happening since 2 weeks before when she and her friends from school decided to play with incantations and spells out of a book that belonged to one of the girl's aunts. She said that the week before we came, she woke up in the middle of the night to her stereo coming on all of a sudden, and that when she came back to her room, her bed had a large pool of rancid smelling clear liquid. She slept the rest of the night in her living room with her dog. Occasionally, her dog would wake up and start growling towards her bedroom. The next day, she went out and bought a new mattress since hers smelled horrible. When she got home, there was a black feather on her dresser, and it smelled like something rotten as well. After talking about the events of the past few days, we told her that if there was a spirit there, she needed to communicate with it and tell it to please go away. We all sat in her living room the next afternoon and she tried it. Almost instantly, there was a loud sound, almost like a shadow that came from her bathroom. We all ran to see and found her mirror had split in two, and one side crashed down as we looked at it shattering into little bits all over the bathroom floor. That was the last day she stayed in her apartment. She moved in temporarily with a friend while the apartment went up for sale and never returned. What do you think? Something that was there, something that they conjured up with weird stuff, or something that was there and then was maybe dormant and then they poked around and worked it up. I guess that's the only way to think about it. What do you think? I mean, could have been, but yeah, in a way, it's good though when you have witnesses that can say, "Hey, this is not your imagination," kind of deal, because that's basically what it boils down to. At some point, most logical people try to rationalize it and think it's my imagination. Am I going crazy? But when you have other people there with you, you're like, no, forget that idea. There's Okay, now this next story out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories is titled Snippy and the Flying Saucer. Snippy, a 3-year-old Appaloosa mare, was found dead on the Harry King Ranch in the fall of 1967. The locals believe the animal was killed by spacemen based on sightings of UFOs in the area. Until one day before the grim discovery of her mutilated remains, her name was Lady. Afterwards, she became Snippy, not to be confused with her full, originally named Snippy, which lived into the 1970s. Excuse me. Her owners were Burl and Nellie Lewis, but they stabled her at the King Ranch, which was owned by Nellie's brother. The first tip off that something happened to Lady was she failed to show up to drink water. Only a few months before Snippy was found dead, Nellie Lewis wrote a short article for the Pueblo Chieftain reporting that at least 2 dozen persons had seen brightly lighted objects moving across Alamosa. They appeared to be white and then turned red and green when stationary. There have been a series of similar sightings in the San Luis Valley recently. The newspaper's accounts described the horse was found after 2 days in a lonely prairie about a quarter mile from the ranch house, dead and from the neck forward denuded of flesh. A smell similar to acetone enveloped the area. Stranger still, decomposition had not set in, and predators gave it a wide berth. There were no tracks of any type of animals even coming close to investigate. Later, Mr. King said no one had come to the ranch before the horse was found, but his wife Agnes said she saw and heard a UFO hovering over the house. Once the shock of finding the carcass wore off, an examination was made of the area around it. 15 circular exhaust marks, which covered 100 by 50 yards, were discovered. 100 yards north of Snippy's lonely corpse, they found a 3-foot bush squashed down to the ground, along with a 10-foot radius around it. Everything was uniformly reduced to inches above the dirt. Close by, a circle was created by 6 indentations measuring 2 inches in diameter and 4 inches deep. Nearby, Nellie Lewis found a piece of Snippy's flesh with a skin attached to it. She dropped it immediately when she felt its stickiness. Afterward, her skin began to turn red, and a burning sensation engulfed her nerve endings. It only stopped after she washed the substance off. Snippy's owner tried in vain for the police to investigate what really killed her horse, but the best she got from them was a roll of the eyes and the explanation that her horse was struck by lightning, despite the fact there were no storms predicted. They never bothered to show up and examine the horse or the ground it'd been killed on. A forestry official used a Geiger to measure radiation around the strange marks on the ground. The count was high and lessened closer to the dead animal. Snippy's strange demise was preceded by reports from the residents of the area describing weird flying objects. A top-shaped object followed a man in his car, and a college student said 2 tires on his automobile blew out when he drove toward an unknown object in a field. If the police were sure that extraterrestrials were not to blame for the horse's death, there were others who were inspired by it. Days later, Dr. John Altshuler, a pathologist, was arrested by park police for trespassing after dark on the Great Sand Dunes National Park. When asked what he was doing there, he replied that he was watching for UFOs. He asked them to keep it secret. They said sure, but only if he'd do them a favor and go out to the King Ranch and take a look at Snippy. Anxious to keep his extracurricular activities private, he agreed. Dr. Altshuler found the horse's heart, lungs, thyroid, brain, and abdominal organs were neatly cut out, with the edges of the skin mottled a deep black as if they were cauterized. The spinal column had been emptied. He wondered on what others had before, which was the complete absence of blood inside the animal or on the ground where she lay. Finally, Snippy got some attention. The Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, or APRO, placed a guard at the gate. The Condon Committee, funded by the U.S. Air Force in those years, sent the carcass to be examined at the University of Colorado. Dr. Robert Adams examined Lady, aka Snippy, and found no unearthly reason for the horse's death. The carcass was sent to the University of Colorado UFO Study Project and examined by Dr. Ora Adams, head of the veterinary clinic. He claimed to find two .22 caliber bullet holes in the animal's hindquarters, and an infection caused by these injuries killed Snippy. The mystery persisted because he found the holes, but not the slugs. What about the missing blood and the chemical smell? No explanation was included in his report. The Desert Research Institute of the University of Nevada examined materials from around and under the horse's carcass, then explained the injury to the horse's neck was due to being struck by lightning. The condition of the horse and the immediate area surrounding the horse cast some reasonable supposition toward an unnatural death, was reported by the scientists. Several marked areas termed exhaust marks were found around the area, and the remains of a tool or bottle that allegedly contained a green fluid was discovered in a field near the horse. Soil samples tested by a biochemist found nothing unusual. Flesh from the horse's neck was analyzed as well, and no evidence of excessive burning was found. The final report stated, since the death of the horse took place during the thunderstorm season and in an area where thunderstorms are common, it is possible that the horse could have been struck in the neck by lightning and killed. Despite the reports issued after the examination of the horse and the soil, the case of Snippy deepened its mystery. In mid-February, the Alamosa Valley Courier published a photograph brought to them by Burl Lewis. They were taken by a Pueblo College student of the area where the animal's body had lain. It showed tracks measuring 5 inches by 5 inches made by a bipedal creature. A conservation officer said that neither mountain lion or bear would make those types of tracks. Dr. Leary, a local veterinarian, finished defleshing Snippy and mounted her on a display held together by screws and wires. The summer of 1968, Snippy's skeleton was displayed in front of a pottery shop near Alamosa, then went on to spend a few years in front of the Chamber of Commerce. Next stop was a private museum, and then she sat for about 20 years in an abandoned house on Carl Heflin's ranch. Heflin's nephew, via an intermediary, offered it for auction on eBay in 2006. He wanted $50,000 but only got $10,000. Perhaps he thought that, like good wine, it would become more valuable with time and stuck it in a warehouse somewhere. In 2022, it was reported that Snippy's bones were now to be found at the UFO Watchtower, a roadside attraction located on Colorado 17, the so-called Cosmic Highway. The main players who shared the spotlight with the unfortunate Snippy stayed living in the area, perhaps looking for the definitive proof of what dissected an animal so efficiently. Nellie Lewis, 55, died on February 12, 1976. Burrow remarried that the same year Nellie died, and he didn't pass from this life until 2009, aged 95. Harry King died in 1986. So there you go. What was it? Was it something? Was it a thunderstorm? I don't know. The only thing that gives me pause that I would say is the supposed smell of acetone, and the thing that you hear about other cases of uh, mutilations, animal mutilations, where other predators that normally would scavenge and eat a carcass don't touch it. And you hear that sometimes with ranchers who have found cattle mutilations, the same thing with cauterizing, what looks like cauterizing and very precise. And they'll say, no, normally, within a few days, if it was a regular, like one of their cattle just dies, pretty soon the scavengers in the area make, whether it's vultures or coyotes or whatever, that thing is gone. And they say, nope, it'll be there for like for it to disintegrate, like with if there were no predators in the area. So, what is it about the cause of death of this animal that would cause other animals to say, I don't want it, I don't even want to come near it, and I don't even, much less eat from it? What is it that could trigger this response from Because remember, even predators, I mean, all these animals which are meat eaters, yeah, they'll run down and kill something, but if they find an easy meal, something that they can scavenge, especially a big piece of animal, let's say like a horse, they're going to eat it. They're not going to be like, oh no, it's dead already. No, they're going to eat it. So, I don't know. That's the only part that I find that kind of like that theory about getting struck by lightning. And then, of course, all the other stuff that they say that they found around it. Anyway, next story out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, titled The Curse of Number 28. Presently, stories abound about haunted houses, castles, cars, collector items, etc. But the real question lies in how did this come about? Take the story about the murder at the Ketty Cabins. Is it really a way to truly release the agony, torment, and terror of incidents that produced the haunting, whether intelligent or residual? Sheila Sharp, 14, stepped from normal to a world of madness on the morning of April 12, 1981, when she returned to cabin number 28 at Ketty Resorts, where she lived with her mother and four siblings. Her mother began renting the cabins at the Ketty Resort in 1980 after separating from her husband, John Sharp. She left Connecticut and moved to the area to be with her brother, Don. Inside, Sheila found three victims bound with duct tape and electrical wire. They were attacked with knives and a claw hammer. Walls were splattered with blood, the furniture was overturned, and her mother, Glenna Sue Sharp, I guess she went by either her middle name or her nickname was Sue. Her brother John, 16, and his friend Dana Wingate, 17, had been butchered to the point they were mostly unrecognizable. Sue was found naked from the waist down, gagged with her own underwear and tape, and posed in a sexually suggestive position, while her wrists and ankles were tied together. Sheila's sister, Tina, 13, had disappeared, and she found her two younger brothers, Greg and Rick, and their friend Justin Smart in a bedroom. They were all unhurt. They claimed they had slept through the entire event. After the discovery, Sheila Sharp ran to the neighboring cabin where the Seabolt family lived. She had slept at their house the previous night. The Sharps lived in the two-story back of cabin 28. John Sharp's bedroom was in the unfinished basement of the home. There was also evidence that Tina Sharp was taken out of the house by way of the steep stairs leading from the kitchen. Jamie Seabolt went into number 28 through the back door. He hoped to find survivors, but this possibly contaminated evidence. He helped the three boys get out through the bedroom window in order to hide the scene from them. Number 28 was one of 33 cabins, and despite the proximity of each other, no other resident in the resort heard anything unusual. Occupants in a nearby cabin reported hearing what they thought was a muffled scream sometime after 1 a.m., but they never investigated it. Justin Smart later reported seeing two men in the house that night, one with a mustache and long hair, the other clean-shaven with short hair, both wearing glasses, and one carrying a hammer. He also described a violent altercation between the men and John and Dana, during which Tina was allegedly taken out the back door. He gave contradictory information, but enough for an untrained artist to draw a sketch of two suspects. It's never been explained why Harlan Embry, an amateur, was used to produce the sketches, when professional forensic artists from the FBI and the Justice Department were available. Despite this information, the use of canines, suspects who should have been covered in blood after what they did were not found. Rumors and motives abounded, from dangerous neighbors, a jealous wife, devil worshippers, a drug connection, or just bad luck, which resulted in a mistaken identity. Why had this family been targeted? Some thought the killers had followed John Sharp and Dana Wingate when they hitchhiked from Quincy, California the same day. Others thought perhaps the murderers were already inside the house when they arrived. Police found there was no sign of forced entry, and the phone lines had been cut. The drapes had been pulled shut, and they could not understand how the murderers were able to spend 10 hours inside the walls of number 28 without anyone noting what was happening inside. Ketty Resort was established in 1910 and attracted visitors throughout 70 years for the scenic beauty of the place and the food served there. In 1984, 3 years after the horrific crime, the property was up for sale for $1.8 million, but potential buyers recognized what the owner already did, which was that no one wanted to spend time in a place where family could be savaged inside their own cabin. In June 1984, bones and a mandible were found at Camp 18 in Feather Falls, about 50 miles from the Keddy Resort. Later, a cranium was recovered, which allowed a positive identification to be made with Tina Sharp through dental records. No cause of death could be determined. Soon after, the Butte County Sheriff's Office received a call from an unidentified male caller telling them what they had found was Tina Sharp's remains. For some unknown reason, this call was not documented in the case. A recording of the call was found in 2013 by a newly assigned deputy at the bottom of an evidence box. One of the main suspects was Martin Smart, aka Marty Smart, who died in 2000. He happened to be a friend of Sue's ex-husband, Jim Sharp, and had a history of violence and was staying in the resort the night of the murders. In a 2008 documentary, his wife Marilyn said she believed Marty and his friend, Severin Bubidi, or better known as Bo Bubidi, had a hand in the murder. They'd gone out that night of the murder to a local bar and returned a little after 1 a.m. She went to sleep, and the men returned to the bar. She woke up a little after 2 a.m. to find them burning something inside the wood stove. Marilyn also claimed that Marty hated John Sharp with a passion. Marilyn Smart was seen in the area around the time of the crime and had been involved in a fight with Sue a few weeks before the murders. She died in 2009. In the documentary, Sheriff Doug Thomas said that he interviewed Martin Smart and that he passed a polygraph examination. This, it turned out, was a lie. Sam Lister, who administered the test, filed a false report stating that Marty Smart had passed it when in truth he failed on certain key questions. He filed an alternative report to the California Department of Justice, but other officials, including Sheriff Thomas, were provided with the true results. Soon after the murders, Marty Smart left town and went up to Oregon. He sent his wife a letter, which he ended with a rather telling passage. Quote, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." End quote. This letter, like the anonymous call, was overlooked and never admitted as evidence. Bo Bubidi, who allegedly had ties to organized crime, returned to Chicago and died November 1988. His own brother, Alvin Bubidi, was a criminal who suffered an ignominious death. In 1959, the 35-year-old ex-convict dropped dead in the criminal courts where he was being tried for armed robbery. He and his nephew, John Bubidi, were captured in October 1958, shortly after they committed a $14,000 robbery. Alvin Bubidi's attorney warned him that 30 to 50 years was the best the prosecution would agree to. Bubidi remarked to his attorney that he was scared to death. This was followed by, "I've got a pain in my chest," and he collapsed outside the bullpen door. He was pronounced dead by a doctor a few minutes later. He had already served 2 prison terms for robbery. That Bubidi family, you think that they were kind of like criminal-like, you think? Anyway. In March 2016, a hammer was recovered at the Keddy Pond. It matched the description of the one Marty Smart said he lost. It was matched using DNA from Justin Smart. A mental health counselor who worked with Martin Smart alleged his client admitted to the murder of Sue and Tina, but denied anything having to do with the boys. The Tina had been killed since she was a witness. In April 2018, DNA evidence taken from a piece of tape at the crime scene matched that of Justin Smart. Within a few years of the murder, squatters and vagabonds moved into the once vibrant Keddy cabins, and the owner renovated it, but number 28, dubbed the murder house by locals, remained desolate and boarded up. Reports of moans, slamming doors, and shadowy figures fueled its reputation as a haunted house. The owner's stepdaughter described seeing the word "no" carved on the kitchen door with a pitchfork next to it. She returned in 30 minutes and everything had disappeared. Prior to Sue Sharp moving to number 28 with her children, it was occupied by Plumas County's then sheriff, Sylvester Douglas Thomas. In 2004, the cabin was demolished. A psychic from Campbell said that even though the structure was razed, the haunting would continue until some type of spiritual ceremony was performed to ease the torment of the spirits there, who perhaps did not understand what happened to them. The events at number 28 served as the basis for the 2008 film The Strangers. Despite its idyllic reputation, violence visited Keddy Resort in the past. In 1936, Hugh Garrett, a night cook, was shot through the jaw and neck by an unknown man. He was dressed in a yellow slicker, gray hat, and mask. Despite being identified as a robber, after shooting the cook, he left without attempting to take the cash from the register. 2 years before, A.C. Berry was critically injured when robbers busted into the lunchroom and made the waitress hand over the cash in the register. A $5,000 reward it offered for information leading to an arrest and prosecution of the Keddy cabin murders, and tips can be submitted anonymously via text to 847-411, which spells out tip 411 with a keyword SW. Long after witnesses and families have passed away and stories in newspapers or books are buried and forgotten, those that stumble upon places like the Keddy Resort, specifically where number 28 once stood, will wonder how it became cursed. And this unfortunate story provides an explanation. So, what do you guys think? I think, let me put in my 2 cents worth. Okay, that everybody, plus it looks like their second cousin was involved. Was there drug trading, drug trafficking, possibly involving the local police? Seems like it. And I think but that there was a personal angle to this, yeah. I think that thing about Sue Sharp having had a fight with Justin Smart's mom, and then that thing about I've bought your love with the murder of 4 people, that's very unusual. All right. And again, same thing, that it almost seems like everybody living there knew something was going on with drugs or something where, hey, I just heard somebody screaming, but I'm not going out. Like, nobody, you're going to tell me supposedly somebody spent 10 hours, or maybe they went back to the cabin if that's where they were living at, the perpetrators, and then they came back and nobody heard anything. Or if you hear a muffled scream, you're not going to go find out, like, hey, at 1 a.m. especially, is everybody okay? So it seems like everybody was in on this or knew something of it. And it was like, well, like, I don't want to be a witness to anything because the next thing that's going to happen is they're going to come knocking on my door, whoever these people are. That's what it looks like. So, yeah, very, very troubling when you think about it. As far as even that thing where you have the somebody that's taking submitting a polygraph test like with the wrong information, but the local sheriff did know. So to me that's like you're all complicit in this. And then whether they were complicit or they were afraid or somebody was running drugs, whoever it was had a chokehold on everybody involved there. Like everybody, like, yeah, I'm not going to stick my nose in here because I might end up like the people in number 28. All right, next story, also out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, is titled The Nameless Thing of Berkeley Square. 50 Berkeley Square is a 4-story brick townhouse in London's Mayfair district. In the late 19th century, it became known as one of the most haunted houses in London. The Berkeley Square district was designed by architect and painter William Kent before his death in 1748. When the actual structure was constructed is not certain, but originally the townhouse was rented out in those early years. When it developed its fearsome reputation is not known, but it gained momentum after the 1820s. Next door to the haunted house is 48 Berkeley Square property, once the site of Sir Winston Churchill's childhood home. He was born at the townhouse in 1874 and his father leased it until 1879. The original house was built in 1830 and demolished in 1906. A 2-bedroom apartment on one of the 9 floors of the current building went on the market in 2024 for £6.5 million. It is one of the last residential locations on the square, which is now predominantly occupied by businesses. Number 50 Berkeley Square is said to be haunted by human and non-human phantoms. A murderous unnamed thing was said to be responsible for several deaths in the home, but there were other suspects mentioned throughout the years. There are stories of a ghost that haunts the 4th floor attic, others say the 2nd floor, of 50 Berkeley Square. The structure has been referred to as the most haunted house in London. Others argue it is not a ghost at all, but an amphibious predatory cryptid reminiscent of Lovecraft's Cthulhu pantheon. Whatever inhabited Berkeley Square remained unidentified, so it became known as the Nameless Thing. It left behind only weird clues to its identity. Unfortunately, it also left in its wake several corpses. Described as monstrous, it appeared to have predilection to claim humans as its prey. The first long-term resident of the townhouse was George Canning, who served as British Prime Minister for only 3 months. It's not known exactly when he lived there, but he died in 1827. There are unverified stories that while he lived there, he had unusual experiences. An encounter with the Thing was recounted in the early 1840s. Sir Robert Warboys, age 20, heard of strange rumors about the notorious Berkeley Square house while he whiled away the hours at a tavern in Holborn. Intrigued but convinced he would lay the ghost and end the legend, which he referred to as unadulterated poppycock. His drinking companions tried to disagree with him, and the evening ended with a challenge to spend the night on the second floor, inside the haunted room. Warboys, a dandy and notorious rake, without a moment's thought, told those gathered round him, "I wholeheartedly accept your preposterous, harebrained challenge." That very night he sought out the landlord and convinced him to let him spend the night in the haunted room. The landlord was reluctant and accepted only if Warboys agreed to bring a pistol with him. The second condition was that if he sighted anything out of the ordinary, he would use the cord attached to a bell in the landlord's room below. Warboys got his way, and as the clock struck midnight, he found himself sitting at a table with a single candle to provide lighting, awaiting for the arrival of the thing. He didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, the landlord was yanked from sleep as the bell from the bedroom clanged with desperate violence. Right after a gunshot boomed from above his quarters, spurred with terror, the man took the steps, two at a time, to where he left Warboys. He prepared himself to encounter a horrific tableau. Instead, he found Sir Robert wedged in the far corner of the room. His lips were peeled back in a grimace, and his eyes bulged with fear. His hand with bloodless knuckles gripped the pistol he'd fired a moment before. A bullet hole had been torn in the wall on the other side of the room. He was dead. 3 years after Sir Robert Warboys met his end at 50 Berkeley Square, two men met something inhuman and indescribable. Although the details of this narrative have varied in minor degrees from one retelling to another, the core of the account has always remained the same. Quote, in 1843, two sailors from Portsmouth, Robert Martin and Edward Blunden, after having squandered their lodging funds on an evening of drunken ribaldry, noticed a to let on the then abandoned Berkeley Square abode and managed to break into a basement window of the dwelling in search of a night's rest. Discovering that the lower level of the house was uncomfortably damp, not to mention rat-infested, the sailors migrated upwards, finally settling down in the now notorious room. Blunden, presumably the more sober of the two, expressed the anxiety he felt upon entering the room. He claimed that he felt a presence, but these fears were promptly dismissed by his shipmate, who used his rifle to prop open a window to allow for a breeze and built a fire in the long, unused earth with bits of broken furniture and rotting floorboards. It wasn't long before the two men were huddled on the relative warmth of the floor, fast asleep. Some time after midnight, Blunden awoke to see the door to the room creaking open. Little by little, a sliver of dim, grayish light crept across the wooden floor. Too terrified to move, Blunden managed to wake his accomplice. The two men sat up as they heard a strange, moist, scraping sound slowly approach them. Later, Martin claimed that it sounded as if something were dragging itself across the floor. Suddenly, the terrified men leapt to their feet and came face to face with the abhorrent visage of what could only be described as a hideous monstrosity. The creature undulated between the sailors and what was their only hope for escape, the open door. Then, just as the trembling Blunden began to reach toward the rifle which was still wedged in the window frame, the creature suddenly lunged forward, wrapping itself around the young sailor's throat. Seizing the opportunity, the panic-stricken Martin ran from the house screaming for help. Soon enough, he stumbled upon a patrolling officer. Although skeptical of the young sailor's frenzied tale and no doubt attributing it to the almost overwhelming stench of alcohol which permeated his uniform, the officer dutifully followed Martin back to Berkeley Square. According to the account, Martin and the officer ran up the stairs but found no sign of Blunden in the room. Martin reclaimed his rifle as the two men continued to search the house. Their efforts seemed to prove fruitless, however, until the men entered the basement and were greeted to a ghastly image that would haunt them for the remainder of their lives. Lying at the base of the stairs in Berkeley Square, moist, rock-walled cellar, was Blunden's dismembered corpse. His body lay in a mangled heap, with his head wrenched viciously to the side. The officer reported that the young man's eyes, much like those of Sir Robert Warboys, were wide with unimaginable horror. End quote. There are accounts that whatever stalks the halls at 50 Berkeley Square is phantasmagorical, a man-like shadow with a deformity of both face and body. Its hands and feet are bird-like, tipped with sharp talons. It was this figure that strangled Blunden with cold, misty-looking hands. Another version tells where Blunden was thrown from a window and he fell on a spike from a wrought iron fence below. Throughout the years, others survived and described something without form, slimy, which made a gruesome sloppy noise when it moved. One eyewitness said the creature snaked forward on tentacles, an octopus-like thing that belonged neither in the sea nor on the land. Could the thing be a mutated freshwater octopus that uses London's subterranean sewer system, which connects to the Thames? Once inside the house, it fed on rats and then found a drunken sailor was a more filling meal. Harry Price, the well-known investigator known for his involvement with Borley Rectory during the 1920s, disclosed how he came across a story from 1790 where the house was used by counterfeiters. His angle was that the counterfeiters used the tale to frighten off any curiosity seekers. According to him, another story told of weird noises, bells tolling, plodding footsteps, and the sound of something heavy being dragged throughout the house. It was so loud that neighbors went inside en masse trying to find the source. He also came across an 1870 article published in the magazine Notes and Queries by W. E. Howlett, which stated, quote, "The mystery of Berkeley Square still remains a mystery. The story of the haunted house in Mayfair can be recapitulated, in a few words. The house contains at least one room of which the atmosphere is supernaturally fatal to body and mind. A girl saw, heard, and felt such horror in it that she went mad and never recovered sanity enough to tell how or why. A gentleman, a disbeliever in ghosts, dared to sleep in number 50 and was found a corpse in the middle of the floor after frantically ringing for help in vain. Rumors suggest other cases of the same kind, all ending in death, madness, or both as a result of sleeping or trying to sleep in that room. The very party walls of the house, when touched, are found saturated with electric horror. It is uninhabited save by an elderly man and his wife who act as caretakers, but even these have no access to the room. This is kept locked, the key being in the hands of a mysterious and seemingly nameless person who comes to the house once every 6 months, locks up the elderly couple in the basement, and then unlocks the room and occupies himself in it for hours." End quote. Harry Price described where 50 Berkeley Square was situated in one of London's most sought-after districts, but the house stayed vacant for years on end. He concluded by saying that perhaps the poltergeist that haunted during the early part of the 19th century had since been dispelled. Other stories involving the attic room surrounds the spirit of a young woman who committed suicide by throwing herself from the top floor window after her uncle raped her. Her spirit is seen as a brown mist, other times a white figure. A less known tale is about a man locked in the attic in total isolation and fed through a slit in the door. Whether he was mad to begin with or not, in the end his mind snapped and he died there. The nexus of this story is a legend involving Mr. Dupree, who was said to keep his violently insane brother on the top floor of the townhouse. He was so dangerous he was kept locked in the room and his screams were often heard by neighbors. It is the phantom of the insane man, described as a figure with a white chalky face with a gaping jaw, who haunted 50 Berkeley Square. It is the top floor where he was secluded that is the most haunted. The likely real-life figures for this character is John Dupree, who along with his wife Madeline hobnobbed with aristocrats during the early 19th century. The family had an estate in Buckinghamshire, which you would think would be a better place to stash an insane family member. The attic is also the setting for the story of the girl killed in there by a psychopathic servant. It appears these stories are several versions of the same haunting but with different characters. In 1859, Lady Elizabeth Curzon, aged 91, daughter of the late Viscount Curzon, lived at 50 Berkeley Square. On April 14th, she died there. Her housekeeper of 30 years, Sarah Jones, followed her to the grave October of the same year. After Lady Curzon's occupancy is when Thomas Myers moved to the townhouse. In 1873, a reference is made to him living at number 50 Berkeley Square and neglecting to pay his taxes. The newspapers refer to the address as the haunted house, and it has occasioned a good deal of speculation among the neighbors. He was known to be well off, and his refusal to pay the taxes was ascribed to his eccentricity, a nice word for mad. This is the backstory to Thomas Myers and his occupancy at 50 Berkeley Square. His father, Thomas Myers, sailed to India and joined the East India Company. In this he was assisted by a great-uncle, John Robinson. Even though he was only 17 years old when he left, he went on to become Accountant General in Bengal. When he was 36, Myers had made his fortune and returned to England. He was elected Member of Parliament for Harwich and in 1802 married Lady Mary Catherine Neville, 18, the daughter of the second Earl of Abergavenny. Abergavenny, yeah. She was also the granddaughter of John Robinson, who had helped launch his career. They married at his home, White House in Ellsworth. In a foreshadowing of what was to come of the Myers marriage, White House, which dated back to the 16th century, would be made into a private lunatic asylum in the 1840s. Lady Mary died in 1807 when she was 24 years old and produced two children during her 6-year marriage. One of them was Thomas Myers, who would go on to live at 50 Berkeley Square. The other was a daughter named Mary. Thomas Myers Sr. died in 1835, leaving his two children well off. His daughter Mary never married and died in 1888 at age 84. She lived at her father's house in Tilney Street. Besides not paying the taxes, Thomas Myers allowed the house to become derelict, giving it an appearance of a haunted house. His goods were about to be seized for non-payment of taxes when he died in 1874. He left his sister the lease on the dirty house with a stipulation that she was neither to sell it nor let it, and he hoped she would live there. Mary Myers continued to live on Tilney Street, and 50 Berkeley Square stood empty until 1884 when Mary Myers died. Quote, the haunted house in Berkeley Square was long, one of those things that no country cousin come up from the provinces to London on a sightseeing bent ever willingly missed. Number 51 wore an exceedingly uncared for appearance. Soap, paint, and whitewash were unused for years, and a grime clung to brickwork and windows alike. The area was choked with wasted handbills, wisps of straw, and all the accumulations that speedily made a derelict London house. The very picture of misery, and every passing stranger stopped the first errand boy and asked various questions, to which the answer was generally haunted house, or, if the question happened to be who lives there, the obvious reply was ghostesses. This was appeared in a book by Charles Harper titled Haunted Houses and was published in 1913. Lady Dorothy Neville published her autobiography in 1906 and made mention that Thomas Myers was her relative. He had lived there since 1859, and she described where after he had lost his fiancée he behaved like a lunatic. His plans were to bring his bride to live at the house, but a few days before the wedding she eloped with another man. He never left the house and would ramble through the rooms at night, making strange noises which was the source of the supposed haunting. She described him as exceedingly eccentric to a degree that bordered on lunacy. Lady Neville was born down the street from the house at 2 Berkeley Square to Horatio Walpole, 3rd Earl of Orford, and his wife, Mary Faulkner. Another story, which might be confused with what happened to Sir Robert Warboys, alleges that in 1872 Lord Lyttelton spent the night in the attic. He shot at an apparition with a shotgun he brought with him. He couldn't find anything, dead or alive, only his spent shells. It seems the stories alleging the source of the hauntings changed throughout the years. In 1879, Mayfair magazine told of a maid who lived in the attic and went mad only to die in an asylum. Another story, very similar to other versions, describes a noblewoman who, after spending the night in the attic, lost a nobleman of something who, after spending the night in his attic, lost his power of speech. There's even a story of a ghostly child who wears a kilt. For the 10 years the house stood empty after Thomas Myers' death, there was a mystery as to who was paying the taxes. It was a well-kept secret, even though the most likely person would have been Mary Myers. In June 1884, Lord Selkirk took up occupancy, despite the reputation the house still maintained as being haunted. He employed workmen who renovated the structure. He didn't enjoy his occupancy for long. In April 1885 he died. However, he was at his residence at St. Mary's Owl in Kirkcudbright. But all was not death and doom at 50 Berkeley Square. In 1887, Lady Romilly, who was Lady Selkirk's niece, on behalf of the Working Ladies Guild, held a sale of knitting at the townhouse. It seemed the Countess of Selkirk had more to fear from the living than the dead. In December 1902, she was robbed. A dressing case containing valuable jewels were taken from her bedroom on the second floor. Inside were a remarkably fine pearl necklace, several brooches, bracelets, rings, etc. The robbery was committed by remarkable cunning. At 8 o'clock in the evening, a young man of very ordinary appearance came to the door with a cardboard box, wrapped in brown paper, and tied with a string. He told the footman who answered the door the parcel was for the housemaid, and there was a letter inside. He had to wait for an answer. The footman asked him to step inside, and he took the box downstairs to the kitchen where two servants were eating supper. The maid did not expect any parcel, and the only thing inside were yards of cheap silk and no letter. The footman returned to the hall and gave the box back, where the young man said he would let the sender know. 1 hour later, one of the servants entered the countess's bedroom and noticed the dressing case had disappeared. Nothing else in the bedroom was disturbed. The police believed the young man was the one who robbed the jewels. However, the footman was positive he did not have the dressing case when he left the house. The police suspected the young man opened the door for someone else to search and take the jewels. In the 1930s, the Maggs brothers booksellers took over the house, and Lady Selkirk, who lived there for decades, dismissed the stories told about it. There were rumors that employees were not allowed up on the top floor. Allegedly, the police hung up a sign in the 1950s instructing that the top of the structure was not to be used, even for storage. Peter Underwood included the house at 50 Berkeley Square in his book Haunted London. Others have remarked a similarity between Edward Bulwer Lytton's story The Haunted and the Haunters and Berkeley Square. In 2017, the Maggs Brother bookshop moved to Bedford Square in Bloomsbury. Was number 50 Berkeley Square truly haunted, or just a victim of well-told, convincing ghost stories perpetuated through every retelling? And if yes, who or what slinked through the structure, watching with vacant eyes the living come and go? What do you think? Could have been haunted? I mean, this thing had it had a variety of people, crazy people, suicidal suicidal servants, and something like a Cthulhu figure or animal or whatever that came up from the basement. Man, it had a little bit of everything. Okay, next story is out of the New York Post, and it's titled Feds Rattled by Rise of Sinister 764 Global Internet Sextortion Cult That Targets Minors and Loves Torture. Lovely. Anyway, okay. The rise of a nihilistic terror cult known as 764 that blackmails minors into sex acts, self-harm, and animal torture has been unnerving federal law enforcement officials. Just last year, for example, the feds in D.C. charged sickos Leonidas Varagianis, or aka War Varagianis, and Prason Nepal, nicknamed Trippy, for allegedly coercing girls to cut themselves, perform gross sex acts, and engage in other horrifying behavior. This sick group convinced young girls to perform heinous acts for the group's perverse entertainment, self-mutilation, online sexual acts, self-immolation, harm to animals, and even suicide and murder. This is per the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Janine Pirro. This office, along with our law enforcement partners, is working to combat the threat of dangerous online child predators with undercover operations targeted at identifying and arresting those predators and bringing them to justice. One of the Warren Trippy victims, a young girl, recounted how she was pressured into performing a cut show on at least one occasion after someone had threatened to release her private messages and images if she did not comply. The two men would then brag about what they were able to blackmail their victims into doing, with War crowing that one girl committed suicide for 764. Since 2021, there have been dozens of arrests linked to 764 and its myriad of depraved offshoots, but its scattered online apparatus poses complications in nabbing the sadists who are exploiting minors. The vile network of cyber predators prey on minors, usually between the ages of 10 and 17, oftentimes girls who are dealing with mental health challenges. Manipulation is their primary MO here. A lot of them are extremely good at manipulating children. Department of Homeland Security Cybercrime Center Deputy Assistant Mike Prado said, "These individuals are taking advantage of the fact that in today's busy world, a lot of parents may not know what their children are doing online. They begin by courting the minors online, often in popular online spaces, and try to get them off platform into private areas of the internet, such as closed Discord channels. There, they'll pressure victims into disturbing actions such as self-harm, sexual acts, hurting family or friends, attacks on animals, and more. Victims are typically pushed to record these foul behaviors when they get used as blackmail to coerce them into carrying out even more abhorrent acts. This includes firebombing, stabbing sprees, swatting, torturing family pets, and more, many of which have been live streamed or captured on video. Almost 4 years ago, for example, a member nicknamed Tobes or Tubbs, allegedly murdered an elderly woman at random to improve his standing with the group. Victims and members are often pushed into cutting themselves with razors, cut signing their username 764 or other phrases into their skin. The originators of this and kind of the drivers of this are nihilistic in worldview, Prado explained. What makes this difficult is that these cases tend to spiderweb. A lot of times, today's victims or yesterday's victims are now today's or tomorrow's perpetrators. 764 network of evil cyber extorters has accelerationist goals, such as the downfall of the current world order, including the U.S. government. According to the Justice Department, acolytes want to foment chaos and social instability. The goal of these groups in general is to really one up or top each other, Prado explained. These groups gain online credibility amongst themselves for the increased level of depravity that they can inflict or cause to their victims. It seems almost too wild to believe, but that's what our agents are routinely seeing. Prado and many of his colleagues don't like to comment on specific groups like 764 because it can feed their narcissistic need for attention, though the DOJ has identified and made grave warnings about 764's growing cult of cyber sextorters. 764 was founded in 2021 by Bradley Chance Cadenhead, who dropped out of school at the age of 15 and became locked into his computer in his room after facing constant bullying and struggles with his mother's alcohol habits. Cadenhead named the network after the digits of his hometown zip code 76401 and 76402 in Stephenville, Texas. Wow. Online, he quickly flipped the script in the bullying he endured. I'm sorry. At the this is like I'll read this and I have some background information on this. But anyway, online he quickly flipped the script on the bullying endured in school to become an internet predator known as Felix, cultivating a global cult of sadists on Discord built off his domineering cyber persona. Cadenhead, who is now serving out an 80-year prison sentence, and his sick followers blackmailed their young victims into filming themselves in disturbing acts. They frequently shared gore and child porn. At one point, he pressured a 10-year-old girl to share nudes. Cadenhead frequently and cruelly boasted about these extortions, which gave prosecutors ample fodder against him. I can give you a guide on how to kill yourself 10 different ways that are very descriptive since you're too effing stupid and can't kill yourself correctly. I want to watch somebody kill themselves, he wrote in one of his disturbing messages. Cadenhead is believed to have been inspired by other wicked groups such as the neo-Nazi Order of Nine Angles and CVLT, which similarly pressured children into sex acts. 764 goes further than CLVT, which I think they're trying to spell cult, with animal torture, rape, self-harm, bestiality, and other evil behavior. Very rarely do we get a chance to look evil in the face, prosecutor Jet Smith said during Cadenhead's sentencing in 2023. According to the outlet, this may be one of those times. Now the feds have to grapple with the sick people Cadenhead inspired and the offshoots of 764. In December, for example, federal prosecutors charged a 19-year-old who led the 8884 network, an offshoot of 764. He and an accomplice allegedly recorded and tried to pressure a female minor into attempting to kill herself by overdosing on pills. They also allegedly got other victims to cut their tongues, torture a cat, light themselves on fire, and more. I don't think Stephen King is dark enough to come up with some of the stuff that these kids are coming up with. Justin Schur, an attorney in the DOJ's National Security Division, said about 764 and offshoot groups. Last year, the feds also nabbed a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old accomplice who are accused of creating lore books under the 764 subgroup, 764 Inferno, where they psychologically tormented at least 8 minors, pressuring them to cut blood signs into their bodies. These defendants are accused of orchestrating one of the most heinous online child exploitation enterprises we have ever encountered, a network built on terror, abuse, and the deliberate targeting of children's. Disturbingly, the feds have seen a significant increase over the last several years of that type of cybercrime, an uptick that seemingly began during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Puro urges parents to be more attentive to their children's online activities. I can't stress this enough to parents. You are the first line of defense. Please pay attention to what your children are doing on their phones and computers. Don't allow them to be trapped by online monsters. The DHS runs an initiative called No to Protect to combat sadistic online sexploitation and child sexual exploitation by raising public awareness for parents, including warning signs such as unexplained marks on their kids and on behaviors towards animals. Right. And then, recently I had come across another story where they identified, I think that he convinced a girl to kill herself. One of these guys tied into 764. They have like different offshoots, but they're all kind of like, even though they might name themselves something, but they all do the same thing. Finally, the local police and the FBI became involved. It took them 2 years to track down that the guy that did all this was an Iranian medical student living in Germany, right? They go over there to Germany and share all their information, everything that they've done to identify this is the perpetrator of this, which, of course, there's other victims. There was another girl in Sweden or one of the Nordic countries. Same thing. She was still alive, but she had done a lot of weird stuff like that self harm. It took them like 2 years more for the German authorities to go and arrest him, even though basically they were hand fed who this was, what he had done, everything. And and from what I understand, the investigators here in the United States were sick, and they said that after they had finished basically doing their investigation, and by the way, they flew to Germany with this information. This was not like, oh, let me send you an email, look at the attachments. And it took them that long. And I believe the guy was, like I said, an Iranian, a medical student, young guy. I don't know what came of it. This was recent. By the time that they got around to notifying the German authorities, they like sat on it for a while. Like, I hope this guy never finds out you guys are looking for him because if not, he'll just leave the country. So I think that's one of the problems that they have with these 764 like cults or whatever they are, is that a lot of times they are based out of this country. By the time they're traced back, but of course, the most important thing is knowing what your kids are doing online and that there's a lot of sick, what's out there, a lot of them. So, anyway, guys, I will be back soon with more eerie news. Till next time.